You believe you are rational, that you weigh pros and cons, analyze outcomes, and move with logic. But look closer. Every rational choice you've ever made carried an emotional fingerprint. That job you took out of ambition, it was pride disguised as reason. That person you forgave because it was the right thing, it was fear of being alone, polished with virtue. Even your silence, the moments you chose not to react, often came from anger restrained, not reason employed. The myth of the rational mind is the most seductive lie in human history, because to believe you are above emotion is to become its slave. Philosophers have known this for centuries. Marcus Aurelius warned, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." But what he left unsaid is that power requires awareness, and awareness begins when you question the illusion of control. The truth is unsettling. You don't make rational decisions, you rationalize emotional ones.
Modern psychology has only confirmed what the ancients intuited. The mind is not a machine of reason. It's an emotional organism that pretends to be one. Every choice you make begins with a feeling, a subtle signal from deep within the limbic system, long before the rational mind arrives to justify it. You want, then you explain. You fear, then you argue why it's logical to avoid. You desire, then you frame it as strategy. Robert Greene described this as the emotional infection of thought. When emotion precedes logic, reason becomes a courtroom defense for the impulses already in motion. Think of the general preparing for battle. He tells his soldiers, "We fight for honor, for country, for duty." But underneath the rhetoric lies something older: pride, vengeance, ego, the raw pulse of emotion that moves men before reason ever speaks. This emotional precedence is why political leaders manipulate crowds not with facts, but with feeling. Why advertising doesn't sell products, but identities. Why betrayal stings more than loss. Because emotion defines meaning, not intellect. Even the Stoics, those masters of restraint, never denied emotion. They feared being ruled by it, because to them, emotion was not weakness, it was power without discipline. And power, left untrained, always consumes the one who wields it.
Since antiquity, philosophers have wrestled with the war between reason and emotion. Plato compared the soul to a chariot pulled by two horses, one noble, representing reason, and the other wild, representing desire. To achieve wisdom, one must control both without killing either. But this balance has been misunderstood. Society glorifies rationality as superiority, the cold, calculating mind that transcends the messiness of feeling. Yet, as Nietzsche warned, this worship of reason creates hollow men, intellect without vitality, logic without purpose. A purely rational mind is not human, it's mechanical. It cannot inspire, create, or love. Even Machiavelli, the prophet of strategy, admitted that fortune favors those who act with audacity, a deeply emotional force. The truth, then, is paradoxical. Emotion is not the enemy of reason, it is its foundation. Without it, there is no drive to think, no reason to plan, no fuel to act. The Stoics sought control, not elimination. They mastered the flame without extinguishing it, because they understood a man without emotion is not wise, he is empty, and an empty man is easy to control.
Power doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears confidence. And in a world where emotion masquerades as logic, nothing is more persuasive or dangerous than certainty. The human mind is addicted to it. Certainty feels safe, predictable, final. It calms anxiety and organizes chaos. But beneath that calm is something darker: fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of appearing weak. So the mind manufactures logic to protect itself, not to discover truth. This seduction of certainty is one of the oldest emotional manipulations in history, and one of the most invisible. It begins subtly in our need to feel right, not to be right. Take the example of ancient Athens, the birthplace of democracy and debate. Philosophers filled the agora, arguing about justice, virtue, and truth. Yet despite all their talk of reason, entire crowds could be swayed not by argument, but by emotion. Socrates himself was condemned not by evidence, but by fear, the collective unease he provoked in others. The city that worshipped rational discourse killed its greatest rational thinker, emotionally. Centuries later, the same mechanism reappeared in politics, religion, and everyday persuasion. Charismatic leaders learned that reason doesn't win followers, conviction does. The confident liar will always outshine the uncertain truth-teller. Why? Because people don't follow logic, they follow the feeling of certainty. It's why conspiracy theories spread faster than facts, why social movements often ignite through outrage, not understanding, and why even in personal relationships people cling to false beliefs long after evidence has proven them wrong. Our brains evolved this way. Neurological studies show that when a person feels certain, their reward centers light up, the same regions activated by pleasure or survival instincts. Certainty isn't a thought, it's a drug. And once it floods the system, logic becomes its servant. Consider how this plays out in leadership. The general who doubts his own command loses his army before the battle begins. But the one who projects confidence, even in uncertainty, commands obedience. History remembers Napoleon not for restraint, but for conviction. He could convince men to march toward death not because his strategy was flawless, but because his belief was. Yet the same force that builds empires also destroys them. Certainty breeds blindness. When every decision feels righteous, reflection dies. When you cannot doubt yourself, you stop evolving. We see this in modern life too. In corporate boardrooms, decisions are often made under the illusion of data and logic. Charts, numbers, and models give the performance of rationality. But peel back the surface and you'll find egos battling beneath the graphs. Fear of losing reputation, desire for dominance. The business decision becomes an emotional negotiation, dressed in spreadsheets. Even on social media, this psychology thrives. Every argument is framed as fact. Every post a claim to superiority. But what drives it isn't clarity. It's the emotional satisfaction of being right in public. Logic has become a performance art. The Stoics warned about this. They called it assent. The moment the mind accepts an impression as truth without examination. Most people, Marcus Aurelius observed, never examine their impressions, they react. And in that reaction, emotion seizes control. Certainty, then, is not strength. It's armor, heavy, comforting, and blinding. Those who wear it mistake rigidity for wisdom. But the wise know that power lies not in being sure, but in remaining aware. Aware of the emotional tides beneath the words, beneath the confidence, beneath the calm. Because once you see how emotion builds the illusion of logic, you no longer fear uncertainty. You wield it. And that is when the rational mind, at last, begins to awaken.
Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. The masses are impressed by appearances, he wrote. Reality is grasped by few. Modern politics is still Machiavellian theater, where data is used not to inform, but to persuade. Every statistic can be bent, every graph can be framed. What looks like logic is often emotional storytelling with numbers attached. Consider how corporations use this same alchemy. They call it marketing psychology. The goal isn't to appeal to your mind, it's to bypass it, to make you feel before you think. The color red to trigger urgency, faces smiling to simulate trust, scarcity to awaken primal fear of loss. Each design choice, each slogan, each image, engineered not for truth, but for reaction. The rational consumer does not exist, only the emotional human, wrapped in the illusion of choice. The Stoics saw this danger long before it wore a modern face. Seneca warned that man's greatest weakness is his belief in his own control, that he who believes himself purely rational is most enslaved because he no longer guards his own emotions. And in today's world, that slavery is voluntary. We surrender our minds to algorithms that know us better than we know ourselves. They feed us not what is true, but what will feel true. Each scroll, each click, each outrage, a small manipulation disguised as preference. The tragedy is not that humans are emotional. It's that we pretend we're not,
The pretense blinds us. We cannot master what we refuse to acknowledge. True rationality begins not by rejecting emotion, but by understanding its architecture, where fear hides beneath logic, where pride masquerades as principle, where desire calls itself reason. The most dangerous mind is not the emotional one. It is the one that denies emotion altogether. Because, in the end, the rational man who believes he's immune to feeling is like a king who abdicates his throne and doesn't even realize it.
In the modern world, emotion has learned how to disguise itself. It wears a suit. It speaks the language of data. It hides behind the polished surface of objectivity. But beneath every chart, every headline, every confident prediction, emotion is whispering. And it's whispering control. We are told that science and economics are rational disciplines, that data speaks truth and numbers don't lie. But history reveals something more unsettling. Even the so-called rational systems of humanity are built atop emotional impulses, fear, ambition, greed, and the hunger for certainty. Take the financial markets. They move not by reason, but by collective emotion. A rumor, a tweet, a headline, and billions evaporate overnight. Investors call it market sentiment, as if naming it tames it. But sentiment is simply emotion in uniform, dressed as logic, obeyed as law. The Great Depression, the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, all were triggered by emotion-driven overconfidence and fear masquerading as rational calculation. The philosopher David Hume once wrote, "Reason is the slave of the passions." Centuries later, neuroscience confirmed it. When a person makes a decision, even one that seems purely logical, their emotion brain lights up first. Only after the emotion fires does reason step in to justify it. The rational mind is not the commander, it's the lawyer, arguing the case emotion has already decided. Look at the courtroom. Justice is supposed to be impartial, a system of logic, not feeling. But every lawyer knows that the verdict often turns not on evidence, but on emotion. A trembling voice, a single tear, a calculated pause. The jurors don't weigh facts, they feel conviction. The judge calls it reason, but it is resonance that moves the gavel. Even democracy itself, the crown jewel of rational governance, bends beneath emotion's weight. Elections are not won through logic, they are won through feeling. Fear is the strongest campaigner. It paints enemies in shadows, promises safety in return for obedience, and dresses manipulation as leadership. Today, we live in an age that worships logic, data-driven decisions, rational frameworks, objective truths. But behind every algorithm, every business plan, every debate, there's an emotional agenda. A CEO might justify layoffs as efficiency, but beneath the surface lies fear. Fear of failure, of investors, of image. A politician might call for unity, but underneath it beats a desire for approval, for control. Even the rational skeptic,
The one who claims to follow science does so not purely for truth, but for identity. We choose what logic we serve based on the emotion it satisfies. The philosopher David Hume said it best: "Reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions." He didn't mean that reason is useless, only that it cannot exist without emotion's direction. Emotion tells reason where to aim. That's why true mastery is not to kill feeling, but to command it. You must make emotion your ally, not your ruler.
The first step to mastering emotion is to stop pretending that you don't have any. For centuries, strength has been equated with suppression, as if silence were the same as serenity and numbness were the same as control. But the Stoics, those ancient architects of composure, never preached denial. They taught understanding. To know your emotions is to see them before they see you. To feel anger rise and recognize its origin. To sense fear whisper and trace its shape. To observe your pride, your envy, your desire, not as enemies, but as messengers. Each emotion is a signal. It tells you where you are weak, what you value, what you fear to lose. And the man who can interpret those signals rules himself, while others remain ruled by them. Epictetus once said, "You cannot choose your circumstances, but you can choose your response." That choice between reaction and restraint is where emotional awareness becomes power. Because the difference between a master and a slave is not in emotion itself, but in the timing of it. The slave reacts instantly. The master waits and watches. He delays action just long enough for reason to enter the room. In that brief pause lies the throne of self-command. But awareness is not passivity, it is precision. A man who understands his emotions can weaponize them. Anger becomes fuel for courage. Fear sharpens preparation. Sorrow becomes depth. Even love, when understood rather than worshipped, becomes clarity. This is not cold detachment. It is alchemy. It is the transformation of chaos into strength. Modern psychology calls this emotional intelligence, but the ancients practiced it long before the term existed. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, dissected every impulse that crossed his mind. He would ask, "Is this within my control? Is this born from reason or vanity? Does this serve my virtue or my ego?" By questioning his feelings, he stripped them of their authority. He did not suppress them, he redefined them. In contrast, the average person lets emotion write their story. One insult ruins their day. One rejection rewires their self-worth. They are puppets of their own biology, reacting, regretting, repeating. The wise man cuts the strings. He sees every emotion as a teacher, not a tyrant. He listens, learns, and then chooses. True emotional mastery is not becoming unfeeling. It's becoming unshakable. To feel deeply, yet remain unmoved by the storm. To sense every tide within yourself, yet let none of them steer the ship.
Because the world doesn't belong to the strongest or the smartest. It belongs to those who are calm when others are lost in the noise. When reason and emotion find balance, man transcends instinct. He stops being a creature of reaction and becomes a creator of destiny. In the silence after emotion, when thought finally breathes, that is where mastery begins.
Those who deny their emotions don't eliminate them. They amplify them in shadow. Suppressed anger becomes passive aggression. Unacknowledged fear becomes control. Repressed desire becomes obsession. Carl Jung called this the shadow self, the emotional residue of what the rational mind refuses to see. When ignored, it rules from the dark. This is why the most logical people often explode when their logic fails. They've mistaken suppression for mastery. And when emotion finally breaks free, it doesn't whisper, it screams. True Stoicism is not coldness, it's fire contained, intensity disciplined, not denied. Because only the man who feels deeply, yet remains unmoved, commands true rationality.
The myth of the rational mind is comforting. It makes you believe you're in control. But the truth is far more complex and far more powerful. Emotion is the architect of reason. It builds your logic, shapes your beliefs, and directs your choices. To master emotion is to master thought. To deny emotion is to be ruled by it. In the end, the strongest minds are not the coldest. They are the ones that burn without consuming themselves. They know that logic is the language of emotion made conscious. So the next time you think you're acting rationally, pause. You might just be witnessing emotion wearing a mask.